first of all, thank you guys for all coming out this Thursday evening. Especially, I know we got finals on the way, so it's like not always easy to show up. So I'm Kevin, and I'm a member of the Platypus Affiliated Society Club here at UCSC, and we organize a reading group, public fora like this one, teachings, and coffee breaks dedicated to investigating questions surrounding the left, wherever that may be. And sort of to wit, tonight we're hosting a panel discussion on the legacy. Sorry?
Is it recording?
It is recording, yeah. Oh. Just freeze frame.
Yeah, on
project version. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were recording. So we are having a panel discussion on the legacy of Maoism today. And so I'm going to read the prompt, and then I'll introduce the speakers in the order they'll be speaking, and they'll have maybe 6 to 8 minutes-ish, like loose sense, to give their opening remarks. Then we'll follow around with responses. Then we'll open it up for open discussion and questions, and hopefully we can wrap it up by 10 p.m. That sound good? All right. So the legacy of Maoism today. Formative for many student radicals who came of age in the 1960s and 70s were the Students for a Democratic Society, the Cultural Revolution, May 1968 in Paris, revolutions in the Third World, and the 1970s New Communist Movement. For many leftists who sought to engage, critique, and advance these movements, Marxism meant Maoism, which they understood to be an advancement of Marxism-Leninism. Currently, as the left of Generation Z comes of age, a kind of neo-Maoism is growing more popular, both on college campuses and online. What is Maoism, and what is its relationship with Marxism? How did Maoism emerge out of the Chinese Revolution? What made Maoism plausible, and what makes it appealing today? What may have rendered it implausible? What is the significance of Maoism as a political tendency on the left, and why did Maoism seem in some ways to be more successful than Trotskyism? What has Maoism been, and where is it going? Sorry. How does its history weigh on us today, and why should we care about it? And so the speakers, in the order they'll be presenting, it's actually perfect. I'll go down from that way all the way to this way. So first we'll have David Ewing. He practices law in San Francisco. He's a veteran of the New Communist Movement, and he's a member of the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association. And then after David, we'll have Gerald. And Gerald Smith is a former member of both the Black Panther Party and the Spartacist League. He is a longtime activist who has been active with Copwatch, the Oscar Grant Committee Against Police Brutality and State Repression, Occupy Oakland, and the East Bay Democratic Socialists of America. And last but not least, we have Alex Dillard, who is a student organizer and member of the American Student Union. And so with that, we'll open with David. So Dave, take it away.
Thank you so much. What is Maoism? So there's kind of a short answer, and then there's a longer, more interesting, I think, sort of historical answer. I'll start with the short answer first. Maoism as an identifiable political trend began with the Sino-Soviet split, with the publication in Beijing of Long Live Leninism in about 1960. So at that point, it was clear that the world communist movement now had contending parties for leadership of the world struggle. So when I think of the Maoist trend really began, I think, with the publication of Long Live Leninism, and it had a really big impact around the world. So that's the short answer. What is Maoism? The Chinese were contending with the Soviets on every single issue. Then they claimed to be the true carriers of Leninism into the 20th century, not the Russians. So there was a really broad, make sure I don't go over my 6 minutes, there was really a broad assault on what they considered to be a revision of Marxism in the Soviet Union, and then the Maoists identified the Soviet Union as a revisionist Marxist party. So that's sort of the true answer. Now the longer answer is that Lenin, even before the Russian Revolution, Lenin identified the features of imperialism in the world. That capitalism had developed new features which Lenin identified as imperialism, and one of these was the division of the world into colonies, and then So there's that, and there's also the impact of imperialism in the developed capitalist countries and its impact on the working class in those countries. And among the features that Lenin identified were the corruption of the social democratic and communist socialist parties in Europe at the time, which had, which were moving right. There were concessions made to the working class. Capitalists were able to use some of what Lenin identified as super profits that were made in the developing world at the expense of workers in the developing world. Were able to use those profits to corrupt the parties of Marxism in Europe and in the West, and also to corrupt the working class struggle as much as they could. That they could maybe pay a little more wages, try and discourage workers from organizing, and especially trying to discourage them from organizing as workers to fight for revolution. So that is kind of from Lenin's point of view, there was now a basis for a revolutionary movement in the developing world. And at the Second Congress of the Communist International in 1920, there was a debate about what was the role going to be of the developing world. And Lenin thought that it was very important for the communist movement, the world communist movement, to try and help organize workers in the developing world, support peasant demands too in the developing world. And there has been a debate among Marxists ever since 1920, ever since that, about what's the proper revolutionary strategy for developing countries. Some groups, like I would say Mao, have emphasized maybe more the national liberation character of the revolutionary movement in the developing world, and other groups I would say I'd say Trotsky is an example of this. They identified more the social character of the revolution as being the key to creating a successful revolution in developing countries. By social character, I mean the role of the working class, not the peasants as much, but the leading role of the working class, even though it's small, in the developing countries. So I think what position parties have taken on this depend on how you weigh these features of politics in the developing countries. Is it mainly the social revolution or mainly the national revolution? And what is the balance between revolutionary movements based on nationalism, national freedom from imperialist oppression, and the class struggle of working people to establish real social societies in the developing world? So how you kind of determine where you come down on those really big ideological and political issues, I think that determines your orientation. And Maoism came down more on the side of the national struggle, that it was important to organize people to do that. But at the same time, in the actual discipline of the Communist Party of China, they were under Comintern control. People in the communist parties of the world had to accept leadership from the Comintern in Moscow. And so, although there were different tendencies, there are a lot of different tendencies in all the parties, but certainly in China, people had to adhere, and Mao adhered, to basic principles of Marxism, I think. And he was under discipline to do so. But I don't think it was all that forced. So there was always this, debate about the character of the revolution in China. And China was a country that was, especially at the time of the beginning of the revolutionary movement in 1920, after World War I, in places like Shanghai and the big cities in China, Beijing, there was an uprising, an organization of the left that started out pretty small, but there was also a powerful national movement. There have been national movements in China before to topple the Qing dynasty. And they eventually, that happened in 1911. And the dynasty was toppled, then it was the people who who beat the Qings. They became very corrupt. And so China entered this period of warlordism after 1911 up until the 20s or so. And so their character of politics in China revolved around contending warlord armies. But it wasn't all the warlords. One of the revolutionary armies was led by Sun Yat-sen, who was a sort of a bourgeois nationalist, but extremely radical, and he was a supporter of the Russian Revolution, received advisors, money, weapons, even aircraft, a couple of aircraft, from the Soviet Union to develop his army. So there was this period of where the Kuomintang army, the KMT army of Sun Yat-sen was contending. After his death, there was a fallout. His army was fighting to defeat all the warlord armies. And then we have the failure of the revolution in 1927, and lots of other things happened. But I think I'm exhausting my 6 minutes. What do you think?
You can wrap up the thought.
Okay. So Maoism. Just say a few words about Maoism in the U.S. But for young people, and I'm 70. I'll be 73 next month. So, but when I was younger, in the 60s, the revolution in China seemed to be so much more radical than the kind of the peace propaganda that we were getting from the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union has had an orientation. The orientation of Soviet politics was, we'll organize all the parties that we control to demand peaceful coexistence and peace with the U.S. imperialists. And then at some point, there'll be a big economic crisis, imperialism, and we'll try to reorient all our parties and try and take power somehow. But it led to, it undermined through decades and decades of this peace policy and peace this and peace that. It undermined the fighting spirit of the working class in the parties that it controlled, and in those states. So Maoism, for young people, seemed like a breath of radical, fresh air, a new chance of revolution, and that's what attracted me to Maoism.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
You bet. My
Next
pleasure.
up, we have Gerald.
Yeah, I actually agree with Dave. Dave is what I consider a small C communist, and that is that he doesn't carry the ball and chain of the reformist Popular Front politics of the Communist Party USA, but he certainly has extensive experience and knowledge of the movement here in the United States. So, he started off correct. Maoism began with that split, the Sino-Soviet split. But actually, myself, I started to relate to China as a teenager. I was a teenage Maoist. Now, I really wasn't a Maoist because I think I was more of a third world Stalinist. That is, I like Che Guevara, I like Mao, Ho Chi Minh, that, and anybody that was giving the white man hell. That's what I liked. I liked the sense that we were going to overthrow these motherfuckers, that we were going to do something real ugly to them. And that was kind of, my motivating factor to embrace Mao. So I never went, Maoism unfortunately hardened up in the United States, but it was a part of my own experience. I joined the NAACP when I was 14 years old. At that time, the NAACP was a mass organization. So we had huge numbers of young people that were members of the NAACP all over the United States. All right? They were grooming us. They wanted us to wear the white shirt. the tie, the jacket. You understand what I'm saying? And what they wanted us to do, the money didn't particularly come from poor black people or from working class black people who didn't have a whole lot of extra, money to, to share with the NAACP. But white liberals, they aimed at the white liberals, and so they aimed us at the white liberals. And I quickly saw that, I was disgusted by it, and so I don't think I lasted a year in the NAACP. But then, of course, the next year, you had a phenomenon where the rent strike in Harlem took place, which was a mass phenomenon. And so I wound up working closely with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, which was, you've heard of Bernie Sanders. I think Bernie Sanders was in CORE, And so this was, I saw them as far more militant. I remember. All right, now I remember. We wanted to sit down at the World's Fair. Did you ever hear the World's Fair? No. Okay. I think it was once a year, they would have this thing called the World's Fair. And they would come and set up, exhibits about the latest word in technology and where the world was going and this and that, It's educational, So we, the militants, we wanted to sit down at the World's Fair. We thought that might be dramatic and that might draw some real attention to our cause. So we went back and we told the NAACP leadership, we said, we want to sit down at the World's Fair. Yeah. Them motherfuckers turned white. They turned white. And that was the first real instance where I saw that these people were an obstacle to militant activity. And that added to my exit, from the NAACP. And so I started working around CORE. But understand this, the civil rights movement was a mass movement. So I remember when I was 15 years old, I put up a sign, meeting tonight, we're going to call a rent strike. 25 people would come from the same building. I don't see that today. Americans are not quite, there, all right? So the 60s were way more political. Also, what kind of took us towards Maoism, the young blacks I'm talking about, who considered themselves militant, is, what was it, the Bandung Conference?
Bandung,
Say,
Indonesia, yeah.
Bandung Conference. I remember that. Well, here again.
1965.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was, did China participate?
Yeah, Joe and I gave a very famous speech at the Bandung Conference about international relations. Yeah.
That's right. So I remember that, and I said, well, so that's it. We rolling. We got a leadership, et cetera, et cetera. I was thinking that things were looking up, and at that time, I remember Robert Williams. Robert Williams had organized in the NAACP. I'm sorry. I want to try to make this quick because my time is short. But Robert Williams was an organizer in the NAACP, and he was organizing in Monroe, North Carolina. And he actually wound up arguing that we needed to have some form of self-defense. They tried to run him off the freeway. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan was active in the South at that time. So he actually formed a militia, a black militia, and militarily defeated the Ku Klux Klan. I know you don't know about this, but you need to know about this. The book is called Negroes with Guns, and it tells his story. But part of what happened, he was framed up and had to leave the country because they was going to lock him up, as they tried to do. And he wound up in China. He went from Canada to Cuba to Tanzania to China. And when he was in China, he finally he met Mao, and he argued that Mao should write something about the black people. And I think Mao wrote a paragraph about black liberation, and we were so happy we didn't know what to do with ourselves. But so that's how much we liked Mao. But we weren't really, in terms of doctrine, really Maoists, because I think we read the Red Book and that was it. He wrote more than that. So I then joined the Panthers, and the Panthers were a lot more eclectic than most people recognize. The Panthers had anarchists in them. We had people that had formerly been in the SWP in the Panthers. We had all kinds of political persuasions in the Panthers. So it wasn't like the Panthers were Maoists, but Maoists were in the Panthers, if you understand what I'm trying to say. I guess later on with this new communist movement, and I just sold off my belongings on that subject. I used to have I used to collect the journals and read them, because I was hopeful that there were going to be some progress. But it got stuck ideologically in this in Mao Zedong thought. That's what they called it. They called it Mao Zedong thought. And it hardened up there, and it kind of got, ossified there. And I remember I was looking for an answer when the Panthers fell apart, and I didn't look towards Maoism because of the fact that it appeared to be already somewhat ossified. But there's a generational thing. The younger people look to Maoism, but the Communist Party actually had been around since the 30s and had really made a dent on the black community. So, Angela Davis, the whole thing with Angela Davis and all of that. So it was not that, it was more of to me, it was more of a generational thing than that the so-called Mao were hands down correct. It's just that we knew that the Communist Party was pretty much reformist. We knew that. You didn't have to have more degrees than a thermometer, Fred Hampton, to know that. But the politics of the Maoists, and then as it ossified into Mao Zedong thought, were not qualitatively different, but it was just outwardly more militant. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay, that'd be it for me right now. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gerald. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we have Alex.
So, Gerald, when you were talking about younger generation of Maoists, I think it's important to point out that the sort of Maoists that exist today and the Maoists that existed in the 70s are basically different things, because the sort of Maoists that exist in America and in the West today are they didn't learn their ideology through some sort of mass struggle. Right. At the very least, the new communist movement was rooted in SDS and some sort of mass struggle. Nowadays, every single Maoist group that exists, even the ones that exist in real life, they basically come from the internet in some sort of form. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a group in the Midwest called the For the People or Serve the People or whatever. There's like Red Guards Austin. They learned Maoism from the internet. They probably watched Jason Unruh or something, and then they decided to organize around it one day. But it's very eclectic, and there's no real base. Obviously, there's no base in the working class for any leftist group today. But in particular, if we're talking about middle class radicalism, modern Maoism basically fits the bill probably better than any other tendency on the left, besides maybe anarchism. And But if we're talking about the new communist movement, Maoism, it's kind of interesting how every single new communist movement group, you can go on Marxist.org, Encyclopedia of Anti-Revisionism online, and you can see there's all these groups. What happened to all of them? They all went away, except for like the RCP and Frizzo. Those groups became Democrats. So I feel like I think the best analysis, both the historical Maoism, but especially Maoism of today, it's pretty much just middle-class radicalism. It was a passing fad for youth who wanted to be more radical than the CP, more radical than more radical than the SWP, more radical than the existing mainstream socialist and communist groups at the time. So they looked to Maoism, and because that's what happened to be popular. And I don't even like to define, like people say Maoism. I don't even think Maoism really started in China, in the sense that the sort of what Maoism meant in the Chinese context, it actually had roots in some sort of national, like civilizational context. But Maoism in the West is a complete parody of the Maoism that existed in China. The Maoism that existed in the West, particularly in America, but also in France, was pretty much like this postmodern sort of thing that latched on to Maoism because of the Cultural Revolution. And you had certain Maoists that like were once Trotskyists or like were these weirdo postmodernists or anarchist types. And they saw like the Cultural Revolution as being like a Maoism as being a break with Stalin and Stalinism. And I don't know, but it's like Maoism was just a passing fad, and in the 70s. And I think today's Maoism is even less productive than the historical Maoism was, because all the people that are becoming Maoists today, they become communists through high school or college. They form their group. They realize that forming a group takes more work than just declaring yourself a group. So then they basically go to the ultra left, and then they basically reject everyone who's not as advanced as them, and then they realize that they've basically wasted their time. So then they become Democrats again. Carl Davidson is a person I like to use as an example. This man wrote defenses of Pol Pot back in the 80s. He wrote books, like, I'm serious, look his name up. There's like this whole website where it talks about how he actually defended Pol Pot back in the 70s. He said there was no genocide in Cambodia. And he wrote for The Guardian. The Guardian interviewed Pol Pot. They were actually the first ones to do it after the war started, the Cambodian-Vietnamese War. And what happened was that, you know where this guy is now? He's the chair of the Progressive Democrats of America.
Yes, he is.
In Pennsylvania. And he's also part of Communities of Correspondence, which is the Angela Davis group that left the CPUSA back in the 90s. So, and by the way, a lot of Maoists were a part of that formation as well, but that's besides the point. I feel like there is a lot of value to understanding Mao. There's a lot of value to understanding on contradiction and that sort of stuff. But if we're talking about Maoism, not Mao Zedong thought in the Chinese context, which I think is very valuable, but Maoism, as in the Maoism expressed in Western countries, it was all just a passing fad. It has little to do with Marxism, Leninism. It has little to do with Lenin or Stalin or Marx or Engels, or even Mao himself, really. It has more to do with like this sort of weirdo, like academic eclecticism, especially in France, because a lot of the French Maoist groups were literally just postmodernists or anarchists who looked to Maoism because that was how radicalism was expressed at the time.
Okay.
Is that it for your opening remarks?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks to all of our panelists. So now we're going to go back in the original order, a short round of short responses to your fellow panelists. Maybe keep them to 2 to 3 minutes. And maybe in my capacity as moderator, I encourage you guys to maybe also like have the audience in mind, right? There might be a lot of inside baseball you guys are taking for granted in certain regards. So definitely feel like you're talking not just amongst yourselves, but definitely like what do I want the audience to hear with like, what I'm saying to at the level they will understand. Because not everyone has the same erudition or breadth and depth knowledge of history or inside baseball on the left as you guys made. So that's all. So anyways, we'll kick off the round of responses with Dave.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, yeah, Maoism hasn't done well since its collapse in the United States. But, communism has collapsed in the United States, not just Maoism. So, I was a Maoist. I was in the mainline Maoist parties.
Are you?
Yeah, Revolutionary Union was probably the most significant one. became the RCP, which still some rump of that still exists. And then the split in there was a split in the RCP over China, and people who were pro-China left the RCP, started a new organization, and then the RCP went on. But I was part of that split. I was pro-China, and among other things, because of the sharp move to the left that the RCP took at the time, they abandoned all of their work among the working class. They left the factories to do propaganda work, mainly spray painting in Los Angeles. They did a lot of spray painting overpasses in Los Angeles. That's kind of a main party activity, paint slogans. But not waste your time organizing workers in factories and stuff like that. So we opposed that, and we were trying to still organize work. Anyway, and so I was into that main line. But our movement, that collapsed too, and all those people became Democrats. Most of my comrades who were in that split with me, most of them today have somehow become associated with the Democratic Party. And there are like sort of left communist groups that sort of identify as, anti-racist communist groups, but really are part of the Democratic, formation. Especially true in Chicago. We had this election in Chicago recently, and some of my old friends, our strength was in Chicago at the time of the split. So many of those people took part in that election campaign, which I think was a betrayal of the working class to actually to support Democrats, and that progressive Democrat who won the election in Chicago, who will do terrible things to the working class, I think. But Maoism was an international trend. It wasn't just a U.S. trend. And there was, in Africa, there were major Maoist parties. Africa's a place where, because of the extreme battle against apartheid that affected the whole southern part of Africa, not just South Africa, and was then called Rhodesia. But all of Africa, southern Africa, was affected by it. And there were important Maoist parties. They got support, training money from China, and they were significant. And so it was really a broader movement than just, people in Paris and New York who were young people, and, but it was an important movement. But the whole left is, I think the collapse of the Soviet Union probably set our movement back decades and decades, maybe 100 years, I don't know.
No.
But, the collapse of communism in Europe has been extremely damaging for the working class worldwide. It's going to take us a long time to recover, because when you have a collapse like that, it's not just a political collapse. It's a deeply ideological, it's a philosophical collapse. People have abandoned rational, thinking about struggle, and there's an embrace of nationalism and religion and different, reactionary ideologies, white supremacy, things like that. So we had a pretty significant setback. So yeah, I agree that the Maoists have not done well. I don't consider myself a Maoist now, of course, but I think of myself sort of a mainline communist, sort of in the tradition of Lenin, certainly. Although, I think the Chinese Revolution probably wasn't quite as important as the Russian Revolution, but it affected many, many, many people around the world, and of course liberated 1 billion Chinese people from serfdom. So it was important. So I just want to emphasize the international. I guess I just wanted to emphasize the international character of Maoism, and I agree with what you said about the collapse, but the whole left, we all have been in trouble.
That is true.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Dave. Up next, Gerald.
Yeah. And you know what, though? This is unusual, because to tell you the truth, I am a vicious son of a bitch. Okay? I know these brothers from other locations. I know this gentleman for actually a couple of years, and I've known, Dave for decades. So I don't, and you can see their discourse has not been preposterous or silly, or they're not pushing anything that's particularly, I think, harmful to you. But how long is this collapse going to affect us? That depends on you. Shit. It ain't over. This is not over. Yes, it is true that the collapse of the Soviet Union demoralized the most advanced sectors of the working class, etc., etc. Yes, yes, yes. But capitalism is going to collapse. And when capitalism collapses, it depends on what we do to resist and to fight it and to organize against it and to fight for power. And you know what? We can win. So I don't think that it's some curse that, oh my God, the Soviet Union, it's a tragedy is what it is. But it ain't over. The story has not been written about you. Because who knows? Look, here I am, I'm one of the last men standing, okay? I'm 73 years old. 50 years active as a revolutionary. That's a long time. I don't expect, many of you to last that long. But you never know. You never know. It is up to you how long the working class is going to remain in this stupor. And to tell you the truth, look at this inflation. Look at the health care. Look, we don't have health care in the United States. We don't have it. Well, that's not good. Who's going to organize against it? Who's going to call it by its right name? You. So I don't know. I don't know who I'm talking to, but I want to tell you how long capitalism exists, we don't know. And I would like to think that their days are numbered. That's what my entire life is dedicated to. Now, I think that there is, the brother said, there's no basis today in the working class for the left groups today. Well, that's because the left groups is running around kissing the Democratic Party's ass. The DSA, I'm a member of the DSA because I have a perspective of trying to win young people to the perspective of destroying capitalism. And if I succeed, I might have to leave the DSA. But for sure, young people do not want to live this way for their entire lives. So I don't know. I may not get there with you, but I want to tell you, we will see the collapse of capitalism before you die. And it may be before I die. What we do when that collapse occurs is of just that's what matters. That's what's important. And we don't know yet. So I'm totally, all right, I'm a historical optimist. That's what historical optimism is. Okay? I don't talk to you because I think we're gonna lose. Fuck that. All right, so.
Can you wrap it up, Gerald?
Yes, I will. There is, so, you see all these, so the Maoists, Stalin, all, and not just them, a lot of so-called people that call themselves Trotskyists, all wind up, they're in the Democratic Party. Why? What is that? What is it? To me, it's political suicide, number one. The Democratic Party is the elephant's boneyard for social movements. That's what it is. It's the elephant's graveyard for social movements. I tend to think that if you understand the program laid out by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, Lenin in What Is to Be Done, Leon Trotsky in the Transitional Program, you will understand what your tasks are. You have to organize around those programs. Program first, workers' power. And just to let you know, inside of the DSA, I'm in a group, a caucus called Red Labor. And our program is basically for a workers' party that, we need a workers' party right now that will fight for a workers' government. But Mao is looked upon differently in China, too. So, for instance, I noticed in China, they no longer endorse the Great Leap Forward. The Chinese Communist Party no longer endorses the Great Leap Forward or the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Read about it and see. They actually say Mao was 70% right. Well, he was 100% right in one thing. He took power. That's what matters. He took power. So I just want to say I am actually pro-China. As far as I'm concerned, China remains a worker state. And insofar as it is a worker state, I think that every serious communist supports unconditionally the continued existence of China. And I think China, it looks pretty good. They can build a fast rail, the United States can't do it. What's going on here?
Gerald, can you wrap it up?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up with that.
All right, thanks, Gerald. And last but not least, Alex.
So we're talking about the left being unable to reach the working class, and I think the Democratic Party has basically everything to do with the answer. But also it's because a lot of these groups that you mentioned, it doesn't matter, Trotskyist, anarchist, Maoist, ML, whatever. It's like these groups want to lose. These groups want to lose. If any of you were to go into any of these groups, I used to be in Socialist Action. It was like a Trotskyist group. If you go, this is what I experienced, right? You go in the group, you try to do stuff. It's like, hey, we should be doing stuff on social media. We should be trying to doing more outreach to young people. We should be more active in this or that. And then these older leaders, and I'm not saying all old leaders are bad. There are plenty of good older leaders. But specifically, a lot of the old head Trotskyists and old head Maoists, not all of them, but most of them, are basically like, no, you have to do it my way. You have to, and it's not, they don't want a political party. We're not talking a real Marx talks about the real movement. It's not a real movement. It's the illusion of movement. But when the ruling class is on a movement, and you're pretending you're moving, you're standing still. And I left that group a long time ago, obviously. And I think, I'm not saying all groups are bad. In fact, there are plenty of good groups that exist. But what I'm trying to say is that 95% of ML groups, probably like 98% of Trotskyist groups, they're Democrat tailists, even if they don't say they are. Because even though they don't necessarily endorse the Democrats politically, they tail the same social movements, they participate in the same social movements, and any attempt to actually build a Labor Party or build a populist party that's not in the Democrats, they actively and viciously oppose it, either from the right, but sometimes they'll oppose it from the left, which objectively serves the Democrats, even though they're doing it from the left. And these groups most of these groups, not all of them, but most of them are useless. And I think the only solution, in my opinion, is I think communists have to struggle both internally and within their own groups and within the broader movement. We need to push hard against Democrat tailism. We need to push hard, and especially against these old head Maoists and old head Trotskyists who haven't caught up with the times. And there are people I go on the internet, okay? I see what younger communists are saying on the internet. There's things like MAGA communism. There's things like Caleb Maupin. There's stuff like Caleb Maupin and whatever.
What is that?
Yeah. Oh, let me explain. There's Caleb Maupin. There's Haas from Infrared. Some of you might have seen. But the reason these people are popular, right, is because they're not promoting Democrat tailism. With MAGA communism, what it means, it's not an ideology. It's a strategy where it's like, instead of trying to reach the Democrat social movements, you reach the working class base that's in MAGA, thereby cutting off the left, cutting off and I don't even necessarily call myself this. I don't necessarily agree with the strategy, but I kind of see where Hawes and Caleb and Jackson Hinkle, I see where they're coming from, because the left is totally lost in this country. They are incapable of thinking independently from the Democratic Party. And in fact, the independent leftist media in this country, they're basically the independent media democracy now. It's the same thing as CNN, just with the leftist veneer. And I don't know, but I think the left really needs to struggle with itself. Communists really need to struggle against the left. Because if communists don't struggle against the... First of all, communists are not leftists. Communists need to struggle against the left. Or else communists will be stuck where they started.
All right. Thanks, Alex. So with that, we're going to open the floor up to the audience for hopefully a long Q&A. But because some of the discussion veered away from Maoism, I hope it's all right in my capacity as moderator to just repeat the end of the prompt, just so it's in everyone's mind, right, since we're talking about Maoism here.
Okay.
What has Maoism been, and where is it going? How does Maoism's history weigh on us today, and why should we care about it? All right, so let's open it up for questions from the audience. Any takers? Yeah, gentleman back there.
All right.
Speak up.
All right. Hi, I'm Jasper. I'm a Platypus member, but
Speak up.
yeah. Hi. So I wanted to know because I don't think this was really discussed in the panel. Why are people now turning to Maoism? Because a few years ago, in the sort of Bernie moment, there was a turn towards social democracy for the young people. And now they're turning towards Maoism. What about this historical moment right now is turning people towards Maoism? Because the internet has been around for a while. It's not just the internet.
All right, Dave.
I have a theory about that. I have a theory about everything. I'm sorry about that. But on this issue, one of the features that people identify with Maoism is the distribution. In the period during the Cultural Revolution, there was the distribution of food, of commodities, was all done so that everybody got the same. So there was a leveling. And I think that kind of, I think the Cultural Revolution stands for that kind of leveling and that kind of distribution. And I think leftism in the United States today is all based on ideas about distribution. Not production, distribution. So, for example, in Bernie Sanders, the focus is on we need to have a fair distribution of food, all the things that people need, educational opportunity, everything. It all needs to be fair. So, to get that, you have the capitalists have to pay a fair share of their taxes, right? And we have to have socialized medical care or single-payer medical care, so that everybody has access to it. So it's just kind of, that's not Marxism. Marxism is not about leveling. It's about production. Marxism is about, improved, a superior economic system that provides more for the working class, because capitalism has failed and the system is blocked. And then capitalism cannot provide for the needs of humanity anymore. That's the meaning of Marxism. And socialism and communism, that is the next phase. That economic system is required. It's a system of production. It's not mainly a system of distribution. But socialism in the U.S. is all based on these theories leveling theories about distribution. Kind of like it was in England in the 1840s, It's based on that kind of a system. It's very anti-Marxist.
Yeah. Sorry, just to clarify, I meant
Yeah.
so why are they turning to Maoism, not just Marxism in general?
Because Maoism stands for that.
Alex, you want?
Yeah.
It's as simple as this, okay? Social democracy fails twice. DSA loses its relevance. It's losing its relevance as we speak. It lost 80,000 members just within the past year alone, and this was leaked to I think it was the WSWS reported on it, and they're not the most reliable, but that's besides the point. It did happen. It was from internal membership report. That's besides the point. But DSA is a dying organization. Many young people who are getting into Marxism feel like that Bernie and the DSA, they were tricked twice, and that they don't want anything to do with it anymore. And it feels like, and if you look inside the DSA, obviously, like, you have Jacobin, like, this saying for the 3,000th time, like, here's how Bernie can still win. So the young people, they're like, okay, first time Bernie loses, they're willing to give it another shot. Second time, it's like, okay, clearly they've led us astray. Clearly they wasted our time. So why don't we just make the revolution ourselves? And Maoism seems to be, if you've been on the internet for enough time, you would know that there's been internet Maoists for at least, like, especially on YouTube, for at least the past 10, 15 years. So if you go on the internet, Trotskyism isn't as prevalent, because Trotskyism is, like, generally associated with boomers and with older people. But Maoism is really hip among young people online. Well, that and anarchism, but that's a separate thing. So if you're a Marxist and you're on the internet, you're not going to be going to Trotskyism. You're going to be going to Maoism 80% of the time. And if you're not going to Maoism, you're going to Enver Hoxha or some sort of other anti-revisionist ideology, because that's what's hip with the kids on the internet. Go on Twitter, go on YouTube, you're going to see it. So in short, I think it's because social democracy failed and Trotskyism is associated with boomers.
All right, thanks, Alex. Gerald, do you want to respond to Jasper's question?
Yeah, I think that I don't like to talk about, when we used to talk about, we used to run the dozens, back in Harlem, I remember. And we say, yeah, your mama, and people say, well, your whole generation, I actually look for the exception to the rule. And I actually feel that, yeah, okay, I certainly am a boomer, so to speak, but I'm one in a million. I want to tell you, I'm definitely one in a million. And I think, and I'm looking for those who don't see themselves as millennials, okay? Those who stand out, because that's how you start. You start by understanding that program comes first. It doesn't matter what age, because in fact that's something we have to fight against. I'm lucky. My father was in the Communist Party, all right, and so he used to set it up for me to go to the Communist Party's bookstore and asked questions to some of the elderly black men who were at that bookstore. And I found that very useful for my political development. Very useful. So, I'd collect bottles, get a couple of tokens, go down, look at the Natural Museum of Natural History, check out my dinosaurs, and then go to the Communist Party bookstore. That was my enjoyment on a weekend, for instance, okay? So I learned not to pay attention to the age thing. I did not follow my colleagues, on the age thing. I want to reject that, and I want to teach you to reject that. I think, though, because when they start talking about MAGA communism, wow. I don't know what I want to discover this. But here's what I want to try to burn into your consciousness. It is not the age, it is the program. See? It is the program. The Democratic Party is the imperialist party of the ruling class. They have two. Republicrats, we call them, but Democrats and Republican. And they both exist to serve the same class, as far as I'm concerned. And I've remained true to that, at least. I've never voted for a Democrat, ever, in my life. And it's difficult being in the DSA, and watching young people get swept over to that Democratic Party stuff. But for the most part, we have an argument. We have an argument that can't be beat. And it's in the Communist Manifesto. I'll say it again. What is to be done? April thesis. And that's Lenin, what is to be done in April thesis. And Trotsky's transitional program. You can't beat it. Go and look them up. Because program is what determines political trajectory, not age.
Well, Gerald,
Not cliquism.
if not age, then I want to reiterate Jasper's question without reference to it. Why are people, not just young people attracted to Maoism today?
You know, I'm not sure that it's a mass phenomenon. So, for instance, even in China, I was involved in a movement, small movement, to support young Chinese students who had turned to Maoism. And they were being repressed by the Chinese Communist Party. That's kind of interesting, right? But I don't know why. I'll be honest with you. I can't fathom why people would. Because once, if you read, I gave away my Mao's collected works. I just gave them away. That's what I gave them away. But I still have my Lenin's collected works, let me tell you. And I think there's a difference. If you read the two, you can see the difference. And I think that you can see the difference. So I don't think this Mao stuff, MAGA communism, Mao, that's a internet fad. Not useful. When the working class begins to fight back, then that will be your test. See? And it's a test that you have to pass. You will either join the side of the working class and fight with the working class, and then you will see Maoism, class struggle, transitional program, Lenin. You will see in life which works for you. You understand? And I tend to think that I really agree with him that it's not a matter of distribution. That distribution argument is for people that want capitalism to exist, forever. So I don't even fight for, tax the rich. No, that's we need to do something else with the rich. I like to say shoot them. That's basically where I'm going. But more importantly, program first. Look at the program of the organizations that you consider. Study them carefully, and there you will find the solution, not in the age.
All right, thanks, Gerald. Next question. Any takers? Yep.
All right. My question's a little bit, it's not totally thought out, but basically, I kind of thought that perhaps the first, there's a lot of talk about the Democratic Party and how the left goes to the Democrats, and I was just kind of thinking, I think the first time that happened-ish was the Popular Front period of Stalinism, and I was wondering if the consequence of that might have had to do with why the youth were then disenchanted with official communism and then turned to Maoism. I don't know, do you think there's any element in the Maoist movement of the 60s and 70s that kind of led back to the Democratic Party, and what was that, if it seems to be that even in the attempt, but also correct me if I'm wrong about this analysis. Okay, that was my question.
Okay, I'm gonna try to answer that specifically. Once again, how do I look at the world? Program first. Okay, so we talk about the Popular Front. That is, the People's Front Against War and Fascism, Dimitrov, right? That's the Stalinist program. And that has been their program straight through. But Mao has a program also. And what did he call it? He called it the, Oh, New Democracy. That's right. The New Democracy was Mao's attempt to appropriate the Popular Front program of Stalin and use it for China. So the block of four classes, etc., etc. Once again, program first. Okay? So here, Mao, although purportedly a more militant form of Stalinism, at the end of the day, they call for class collaboration in their program. The block of four classes is what? Is the peasants, the workers, and the bourgeoisie, and the petty bourgeoisie. So here again, how do you get such a block? You have to drop the proletarian program. Because if you have the proletarian program, and that is workers' power, no bourgeoisie is going to join or support that block of four classes. Stop.
All right, Dave or Alex?
Yeah, I don't know, Gerald, winning matters, you know? So yes, you can criticize whether you know, the politics during the revolutionary period were correct at different times or wrong at different times. But Mao's direction of the revolutionary movement, he was the main person after the Long March. His direction of the movement turned out to be correct, and they created a revolutionary communist state in China. That matters, I think, you know? So yeah, you know, I know that people can criticize different parts of the program, but I think we have to give credit for Mao. And despite, you know, all the difficulties and twists and turns since then, I think China remains is now the leading socialist country in the world.
No question.
If it goes down, if China fails, after the failure of the Soviet Union, if China is defeated by U.S. imperialism, it will be an appalling disaster for humanity. Who is the defender of the developing world right now? China. China is spending money, sending advisors, helping the developing world everywhere. And now even reaching into Latin America for the first time. It's pretty remarkable. That's because they have a dynamic socialist economy. That is pretty important. So, you know, so part of the legacy of Maoism, I think, is the success of China today. You know, that's that's certainly a positive feature. Yeah,
No question.
Feature
But
that's
brother, I got to say
Yeah.
this. What actually happened in real life? In real life, there wasn't no new democracy. There wasn't no block of four classes. Chiang Kai-shek hit the road. He was in Formosa. The bourgeoisie left the country. That's what happened. Now, you know, so I don't care if their program was faulty. In reality, they didn't say, well, we can't take power because the bourgeoisie doesn't want to take power with us. They didn't do that. They said, fuck them, let's go. And in fact, if they had a navy, they would have went to Formosa and dealt with them. But they didn't. What happened? The bourgeoisie left the country. And when they left the country, you know, that was a part of Mao's victory. So I don't think they didn't. There was no block of four classes. The new democracy is a myth, as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's sorry.
No, after you, Alex.
I think it's important. I think I agree with what Dave is saying. I think it's very important to learn from Mao, even if you're not a Maoist. I'm not, because Mao actually took power, and his party took power. So there's obviously something to learn from there.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because, in a way, I think, like, you know how, like, the current Communist Party of China critiques, like, Mao as, like, being 70% right?
Yeah.
Mao critiques Stalin as being 70% right, in the sense that Stalin was correct in how he I would actually argue that Stalin was correct in how he handled World War II, but there were excesses of the Popular Front. For example, there's Browder and the CPUSA in the United States. I would argue Browder was an excess of the Stalin period. But then the other excess is that Stalin didn't want Mao to overthrow Chiang Kai-shek. People don't know this. Stalin actually told Mao to remain in a popular front with Chiang Kai-shek. And Mao rightfully said,
No.
fuck you.
That's right.
We are taking power, and we will, the revolution, the Chinese revolution, will not be put on the back burner to maintain peace, class peace, to retain class peace, right? So, I think the Popular Front was necessary during World War II because he needed to defeat fascism, but I think there were excesses of the Popular Front, and I think, for example, Browder in this country did no strike pledge. That was not okay. But especially in China.
Locking up the Japanese and supporting the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that wasn't okay. But go ahead.
But in the context of China, it's funny because China still kind of has a Popular Front government today. Because the left wing of the Kuomintang did break from the KMT and they joined the Chinese side in the Chinese Civil War. China has 9 parties today, and it has like a people's democracy sort of government. You know how like Eastern Europe had that? China has that today. And I think the problem with I think Mao was correct to critique Stalin in the sense that Stalin wanted to hold back the revolution during that period for the sake of class peace. That Mao was a brilliant tactician. He understood when to fight, and he fought, he won, and now China is still there, the Soviet Union isn't, and I think there's a lot to learn from.
Of course. Of course there's a lot to learn. But it wasn't class collaborationism that led to that victory. See, that's the point. They didn't listen to Stalin. That's the point. Spain! Please look it up. The Popular Front in Spain led to rivers of workers' blood and to a humongous defeat. And the Popular Front over and over again has led to the defeat of proletarians all over this world. So I'm sorry, my friend. Popular Front is a counter-revolutionary class collaborationist program. It should be fought every time it comes up. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I would disagree.
I know.
Partially.
All right. Question back there.
I had a question.
Speak up.
Oh, sorry. I had a question just off of, I think, what you said for his question about like China being the like the model of like the country that's most pro like
Worker state.
worker state around the world. Would you say that's because you said that after Mao died and the Communist Party now sort of like disavows Mao in a way, right? Would you say that's...
No, I didn't say disavowed. I said they said that he was
70%.
okay.
Yeah, 70%.
That's not quite disavowing. That's disavowing a portion of his program, the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward.
Right. So would you say that because you know the rise of China sort of like happened after Mao, right? Like it happened. They gained a lot of they gained a lot more global influence and economic prosperity after Mao's death and after Deng Xiaoping took over, and sort of like like you said, the New Guard sort of went into a different direction. Would you say the current state of China has something to do with that, or was that sort of like more with it, or is it still sort of like the Maoism portion of that 70% that's carrying China today?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you where I think the 70 and 30% comes from. There was a historic split, a division of opinion. I don't mean a political split into separate parties, but there's a division of political opinion in the Communist Party of China ever since the first 5-year plan, when the results of the first 5-year plan came in, Mao's plan and the economic planners for China, they were depending on peasant surpluses because there was really no industry, very little. Some industry from the Soviet Union at the beginning, so they were depending on productive surpluses from the peasantry. That's how they were going to build communism. That's how they're going to build the economy, based on the productivity of the peasants. Because there wasn't any working class to speak, it was really very small. So
2%.
The party really depended, their strategy was to depend on these peasant grain surpluses to sell overseas and so forth. And that's how they're going to do it. So after the results came in for the first 5-year plan, it became pretty obvious that it would take like 1,000 years to develop communism if you're going to just use, because actually grain production was falling in the beginning, in the first 5-year plan, because people were moving into the city to get industrial jobs. So there's no way you're going to really do that. So the division in the party was this. One solution was Mao's solution. The answer to every problem that Mao faced in his political career, there was one solution: mass mobilizations.
When was the first 5-year plan?
1950, yeah, the early 50s. I think it was 53, and by 55 they had the results.
Was that when they collectivized the
No, that was later, a little bit later. Not much later, but a little bit later. But let me just make the point here. So Mao's answer to that problem was, we'll increase peasant productivity, because in China, in like other countries, peasants during the wintertime really didn't do anything. There wasn't a planting season. So what peasant families did is that you worked hard in the spring, you did the planting to the harvesting, and then in winter, you just stayed home and tried not to move around too much, and try not to burn calories, and live through the winter based on the rice you had stored. And that's how, for eons, China had done that. The Chinese peasants had survived. Mao said, no, we're going to have mass mobilizations during the winter to build canals. We're going to build new canals. We're going to change the landscape. We're going to cut down mountains. We're going to build new fields. We're going to increase production. That was Mao's answer. Not everybody in the party disagreed. The other line in the party was, no, we need capital. We've got to find a source of capital. We don't have it at home. We're going to have to get it overseas. We're going to have to get capital from capitalists overseas, or from the Soviet Union. So that was sometimes more obvious, sometimes less obvious, but I think that was the main division in the party for the whole period of socialism after the revolution. And that's why Mao isn't 100% right, because he had the wrong view about that. It turns out that after Mao's death, they invited foreign capitalists to invest in China. Of course, they made the capitalists give them their technology, and they established the rules that the capitalists had to set for the workers. They established standard of living for the workers that the foreign capitalists had to accept, and lots of other conditions. Conditions that, for example, Chile doesn't impose on American capitalists. China did impose all kinds of conditions. So, based on that different when Mao died, the other orientation won because his supporters lost, and that explains, I think, the division in the party. And I think that Mao was probably wrong about that, don't you? And so that's why he was 30% wrong. Mm-hmm. And so the vast expansion in wealth that China has created began with a dependence on foreign capital. It's not true so much today. China has produced most of itself. But there's still some investment. China is still a developing country, I would say. There's still some foreign investment that's important, But that's why, I think that explains this. That long division in the party, that long ideological and political division in the party about the economy, that explains it.
I want to bring it back to Russia, because I totally agree with them. And I tell you, that's why I love listen to Dave, because he knows his Chinese history. Well, I know some Russian history too, and I know something about what was called the NEP, the New Economic Plan, or the New Economic Policy. Following World War I and following the Civil War that occurred in Russia, you know, for the Bolsheviks to consolidate power, they were in a quandary. They were economically just toe up from the flow up. Lenin came up with a program called the New Economic Policy, and they allowed a certain amount of capitalism to flourish. And through that policy, on, you know, be it in the countryside or the city, they actually built up the Soviet economy. But because the Communist Party was in command, and they built up that economy, and they went forward. In the case of China, I believe that it's their application of the new economic policy that they gave up a certain amount of their economy to the rentier, and they had Toyota, the iPhones, all of that. They were there. Well, now we got Huawei all over the world. This is a Huawei, by the way. So, you know, they've got, and in fact, here's when I knew, you know, a lot of young people say, oh, China's capitalist and blah, blah, blah. Shut up. It's unfortunate that they have these illusions. But in fact, what I see going on, and this helped me to see it, is when they had their anti-corruption campaign, they shot members of the Communist Party who sometimes were millionaires, were capitalists, for corruption. You tell me where on this earth a capitalist state shoots capitalists. Finished.
So let me just say this. First of all, I don't think China necessarily restored capitalism. I would say maybe you could argue it had a retreat, but I would say it was one retreat. That retreat was necessary because it was a small retreat, but then it spring China's economy forward. It made it a world power, and now it's positioned itself in a way where it can actually seriously threaten American hegemony and possibly overthrow it. Because it actually has, I would actually argue it's in a better position to do so than the Soviet Union was. Because unlike the Soviet Union, China actually has the economic power and competitiveness, possibly more so than the United States does. The United States doesn't even have a domestic industry anymore. China does.
It's all over China.
Exactly. In fact, America's domestic industry is China. So it's like, at this point, China, I think it was both necessary and smart that China did that period of reform. And sure, there were excesses of it. You did have the technocrats. But I would argue Xi Jinping's tenure has been mostly positive, especially because all those old technocrats from the Hu Jintao period are being purged from the party. They're being asked to leave the party. In fact, during the 20th Congress, Hu Jintao himself was asked to leave the building. It's because all those old technocrats, they're on their way out of the party. And on their way into the party, you have people who are to the left of those people. I would say Xi Jinping is definitely the most left-wing the party's been in decades. And the party is, and I would say Xi Jinping and his leadership has been mostly positive in this context. And I think he is positioning China in a way that not only strengthens relations with the other worker states, Cuba, DPRK, but also he's bringing unity to the remainder of not only bringing unity to the remainder of the socialist bloc, but he is actively less reliant on America than the previous two Chinese leaders had been. And it's noticeable because like Hu Jintao, for example, he didn't condemn Israel that much, if at all. But now you see Xi Jinping, He's condemning Israel. He's meeting with the PLO. He's meeting with Syria. He's meeting with Iran. He's meeting with all the Arab leaders. And the whole peace plan between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it's very...
That's significant.
You know what? That's smart. Because now that Saudi Arabia and Iran are no longer fighting each other, you know who gets isolated? Israel. And China, I think, may actually be the solution to Zionism, may be a solution to American imperialism, because they're uniting these countries which were fighting each other, which didn't like each other, but they're saying, okay, put aside your differences for now. Focus on the main threat. Israel, America, EU. And it's working. And the other reason you notice this is because the Communist Party of China, under the technocratic period, they established relations with what we would call Euro-communist, social democratic communist parties. Under Mao, the CPUSA was actually denounced by Mao as revisionist. But then something very special happened. During the Hu Jintao period and during the Jiang Zemin period, the technocrat 90s, 2000s period, they actually established relations with all the former Soviet parties, which included the CPUSA, Communist Party Canada, etc. And they actually said in this country for a long time, we only work with the CPUSA, and that's because they have contacts with certain Democrat politicians. We want to lobby those politicians to get better trade deals. But now with the current leadership, it's actually noticeably, especially in Europe, starting to talk to more genuinely communist parties in Europe. In Sri Lanka, they met with a Trotskyist party in Sri Lanka, not like a year ago, and they had an official bilateral with everything. They actually are having seminars on Marxism now with all sorts of international parties. There's now a thing called the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, which is being organized, yes, by the Koreans, but the Chinese have heavy involvement in it. And they actually want to build...
Can you wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. Sure. They want to build a new communist sort of I wouldn't call it communist international, but like the Chinese, yes, they might have retreated, but like, was it necessary in the long run? Absolutely.
We didn't mention BRIC, by the way, since you were going on. You know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So that is an economic alliance that is noteworthy. Please pay attention to it.
20-something countries want to join it now.
All right. Any other questions? Yep. Yeah. So you guys, you talked a lot about how like maybe the left is not like very powerful in the U.S. and then maybe that's like a factor why the students in the 60s and 70s would have become Maoists, right? They're like, okay, people in the third world, developing countries, they're going to be the locus of revolution now. But I'm also hearing a lot now, like you just mentioned, like BRIC and all these developing countries and China being the major force for socialism in the world today. Don't they seem like a little bit, you know, like they had some maybe because nothing else really manifested right on the Mao Soviet Union collapse? Don't they seem like a little bit right in a sense if you're like gesturing towards the future of socialism, being developing countries, being China, being countries that China is stimulating the economies of?
We got MAGA communism though, Gerald.
Look, you want to know? I am not an advocate of salami, baloney to any leadership. Okay, I'm just raising. I think that the Communist Party of China has done some things correct, but I do not bow to them. And in fact, what I think is important is that we need to develop some political confidence in ourselves and build an organization that we can be proud of, which starts off with a workers' party. That's what we need. I hope that y'all don't think that I'm just in love with the Chinese Communist Party, that, you know, I'm in love with the song. No, that's not the case. But that doesn't mean that everything they did has been wrong, though. I do recognize that some of what they have done has been quite positive. And I mentioned, you know, some of it. So I'm hoping that answers your question a little bit. Okay.
Well, can I respond?
Yeah.
Of course.
So, obviously we shouldn't uncritically accept... Let me say this first of all. Obviously we shouldn't uncritically accept everything China says or does, but I feel like one of the reasons why many young people call China state capitalist is because they have this misconception that China is going to build the revolution in America. And that is wrong. China is not going to build, not even Cuba, not even North DPRK. It's going to be American workers who build the American revolution.
I agree.
And we can't wait for China to do it. We can't wait for Cuba to do it. We have to build it by our own efforts. And obviously, we shouldn't attack these countries in like a neoconservative. We like obviously don't align with America. We're not going to do social. We're not doing like Kautsky social chauvinism. We're not going to do what social democrats do, where they attack China for like not being democratic. We don't do that. But the main fight's at home. We have to use the opportunity with America attack. America is trying to attack Russia, or trying to attack China. We're trying to attack Iran. We say, hey, the main enemy is at home.
Yes.
The main enemy is the capitalists.
Yes.
All weapons against the bosses at home. And we must do by any means necessary, defeat the capitalists in America. And whatever your individual criticism of China, or even like non-socialist countries like Russia or Iran might be, remember it's only us who's going to build the revolution. And we can't, like I said, we can't wait for these people. And when you're talking about the Workers' Party, I think I would say that's like the bare minimum. That's like the first, like you're literally not going to have a political revolution unless you have a Workers' Party. It's like, we're not anarchists. We don't believe in spontaneity or whatever. You need a political, you need some sort of political party or political program at the very minimum that resonates with workers. And like I said earlier, the left has failed to do that. The young people who, look, if we had a mass socialist party in America, the internet shit wouldn't matter at all. But the reason people are looking to weird eclectic ideas, and believe me, there's more. There's like, go on the internet, you want to hear about Maoism? You have people who say they're Maoists, they're worldists now. You literally have people on the internet who like believe in this whole settlers thing, where it's like the white working classes, labor aristocrats.
That's right.
So it's like, you have all these people. These ideas, by the way, Dave, so obviously the MIM and that sort of, like the sort of all white people are settlers. That was very fringe, even within the Maoism of your days.
Yes.
The reason these ideas are coming back is because of the internet. The internet is like, now settlers previously was made fun of by the left. Now it's like way more mainstream than it's ever been before, thanks to the internet. And now you have all these young people who, they don't have access, most of them don't have access to an older communist that they can just talk to, or even just a veteran of the movement in general. So then they go to the internet, they go to Wikipedia. Most of them don't even read the fucking book. They just go to Wikipedia, and then we call them little Lenins, okay? They go to Wikipedia, they make sweeping judgments of the world, and they're 15-year-olds who've only read a Wikipedia page on Lenin or on Mao. So that's the sort of Marxism, the brilliant minds of Marxism we have today. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to start from scratch, because, and obviously we need some of the people in the older generation, but we kind of need to start from scratch, because most of these groups that exist, not all, but most of these groups that exist, completely useless. We need to start with something new. And I don't mean completely new, but like, I think you understand everyone understands what I'm getting at here. Like, at least the political foundations, we need to reevaluate the political foundations of the left. And I don't think many, if any, people are really thinking about that. So,
Just to let you know, Red Labor just gave a class that I recommended on settlers. And if anybody is interested, we'll give you the tape, because we recorded it. All right.
I think you have a question.
How you like them biscuits?
Gone over.
That's right.
You sure?
I just had a question about, you said something about ossifying of Mao Zedong thought, and I think we talked about that with like his failures in 70% and 30%, but also wondering, what were the details of like the difference between kind of like Mao Zedong thought closer to his death versus the wider context of Maoism in like circles outside of China?
Okay. What I was going really by my personal, development, and I already told you I consider this gentleman, Dave, not only my friend, but I consider him a small C communist. We're on the same side in this class struggle. But when after the Panthers were, set upon by the government, COINTELPRO, all of that, I had to reevaluate my life, because that's what I considered myself, a revolutionary. So I had to, to really look at it all. And I started to study the left in my next move. And in my opinion, and I'm not, this is not a put down. I believe that when Maoism in America, when people started talking about that Mao Zedong thought, it was dogmatic. It became dogmatic, and I believe that it kind of ossified, and people weren't really studying Marxism anymore. If you want to study Marxism, you can study Marxism. Can nobody stop you? The Communist Manifesto is there. You can read it. I've read it 6 times, and I'm going to read it again. Okay? Because that is a fundamental document. And I mentioned, other documents that were written by Lenin, what is to be done, and the April Thesis, for instance. These are fundamental programmatic documents that we need to rest upon. I think that more and more the Maoist movement in America, when they started talking about, well, no, we ain't just Maoists. We study Mao Zedong thought. That kind of set me off. That set me off, and I looked at their practice, and they appeared to be getting, the thought was more ossified, and therefore the practice was more, I don't know how to say it, less productive, in my opinion. And I do think that the RCP just kind of went off, because I remember when they went into, they supported the racist Louise Days Hicks movement in Boston with the Boston busing crisis. Now, I don't think that busing is the most important, but that children should study together is a good thing, I think. So what you had is a situation where, unfortunately, right-wing elements seized the white people in Boston and actually had an anti-busing movement. I was dispatched there to organize against that. And I remember, the RU. No, you laughed. That was sad.
No, I'll never live that down.
That was sad.
Yeah.
They said
it was wrong.
Yeah.
It was stupid.
Thank you. And the front page. Yeah. We must stop Boston busing. I said, what the fuck? Are you nuts? But that's, and that's what I mean when I say the thought is ossified, because that's not communism.
If I understood your question, maybe if I didn't get it right, correct me, but I think you're asking, after Mao's death, what survives of the political features of Maoism in the post-Mao world? What are the political features of Mao? And I think there are some. They're not that easy to identify, but the orientation to the masses, and the organization towards the United Front work, and those kinds of, I think that kind of politics, those political ideas and those experiences, mass mobilizations, mobilizing people to do things, an identification with the oppressed, all those things are, I think that survived Mao. It's a little bit different than Lenin's, orientation, and it has that, it incorporates lessons learned in building the Communist Party of China in a pretty backward society. But Mao stood for like freedom and equal rights for women at a time, and in backward societies, that's a pretty revolutionary stand to take. He always fought for that, I think, and for equal rights for nationalities, for different
Certainly
nationalities.
did.
Yeah,
Certainly did.
anti-racism. We would call that like anti-racism in the U.S. or something. But I think those features of Maoism, those are political features of Maoism that still mean something, and are, part of that legacy somehow.
Do you have anything to add, Alex? It's fine.
Just to answer briefly, I think I already kind of said it earlier, but just to say it briefly, I think Maoism in China was rooted in some national struggle, some national context. Maoism in America, especially the postmodern sort of Maoism that exists today, is kind of like a parody of what existed in China, and you can tell it was a parody because you can tell it's a parody of what existed in China because I don't really like to call Maoism Marxist. I just like to call it left radical because even a lot of people who were once in the new communist movement, at the end of all these groups' lifespans, they would always say one thing. It's like, oh, we treated Marxism like a religion. Look at the closing statements of any of these groups. It's all of them read the same. It's we treated Marxism like a religion. We didn't actually study Marxism. We didn't try to make our Marxism in the masses or in any sort of domestic or national struggle or any real struggle for that matter anywhere in the world. We decided to make it about like going back to the holy book of Marx and Lenin and Mao, and they were basically just like they basically just treated Marxism like a religious doctrine. Like they were like Christian preachers, and they thought that they were trying to spread the good news. And I don't know, but I just think Maoism in the West has little to no relevance. And like study Mao, but Maoism has little to no relevance because Maoism as a concept, at least the Western parody of it, it's just ultra leftism. It's not. It's middle class radicalism. That's what it is.
Any more questions? Yep.
Okay, so I'm like a little bit of an outsider to like the platypus and the Maoism thing, but I was wondering, like in the current political landscape that we have right now, like what's like the closest thing to like a representation that you guys as Maoists or communists have that you would like identify with?
Wow. What? Now, you know what? That's an impossible task to ask.
Yeah.
I can't answer that question, and I wish I could, because I'm not so self-centered to say, well, don't you see? It's me,
Yeah.
What sort of?
But clearly, what needs to regroup? There needs to be a political discussion about breaking with the capitalists, not supporting the imperialist parties, and forming a workers' party. I consider myself a small C communist, and I don't relate to many of the groups that say that they're Trotskyists. I do think that Trotsky made some definite contributions, particularly on fascism and the Popular Front and the transitional program. Look it up. Judge for yourself. But in so doing, what you're going to see is we're going to have to regroup. And eventually, we're going to all have to be in one powerful organization. And I would say that that is a workers' party. It may become a communist party. But that is the struggle. For what program? We have to, I think we want to continue the program of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky, and Luxemburg, and in other words, I don't agree that Stalin made any significant contributions. I don't agree with that.
Speaking on the Workers' Party question, it would be nice for us to all be in one big socialist or workers' party, but like I feel like due to American culture, I feel like American culture forces us to be individuals. Like we want to do our own thing. We want to be the ones making the change. We want to be. So it's like we have 20 different groups, and it's like I guarantee you a lot of them do call for a workers' party, but they precondition it with we have to be the ones running it. We have to be the ones. And it's like no, the masses choose their leaders. The masses always choose their leaders. Right. You're probably not going to get chosen. And in the case of most Trotskyist or Maoist groups, you're definitely not going to get chosen because they fail to understand what the point of all this is, and that is the working class obtaining power politically, right? And yes, even though they talk about it, but they talk about it in the abstract, but they're not talking about it in a material form. And as Marxists, we're materialists, right? So I would like a workers' party. I would do anything for a workers' party. I want a workers' party, and it should happen regardless of who or what causes it. But I feel like the left in America are not ready for a workers' party in the sense that they're willing to put their own dogma before what is necessary to carry out the class struggle.
And that's why they're melting.
Exactly, and that's why the left is dead.
I'm pretty impressed with Answer and PSL. They have a real activism. It seems to be, they have a. Maybe I only see what they're doing in San Francisco, but I think they're active across the country. They have a real activist bent, and they're pretty good politically. They support all the right, they're pro-China and so forth. They support all the right stuff. So
I'm very critical of
PSL.
sorry.
Really? Okay.
I'm very critical of PSL for two reasons. One, they don't vote for the Democrats. Sure, they
That's
don't.
good.
They don't, but they still tail the Democrats.
No,
in the sense
they
that
don't.
yeah,
I don't think that's fair.
They tail the Democrats, not necessarily electorally, but they still tail their social movements, and they still give critical support to Democrats sometimes. Like they were very soft on. Like I remember Gloria or Brian Becker. It was either her or Brian Becker because those are like the two national leaders. I think it was Brian Becker saying like they were giving like soft support for Andrew Yang back in 2020. They actually did that. You can look it up. And so it's like, first of all, they haven't necessarily. First of all, they still give critical support to Democrats, but that's besides the point. I feel like what's even the problem is that I feel like they're what we call movementists. They focus way too much on tailing these sort of social movements, but they try to insert like identity politics into the anti-war movement. They try to like say like you can go to an anti-war protest and then half the slogans aren't even about the war. And they're not even trying to fight for a workers' party. You don't really see PSL members in the workplace that not around here at least. I don't see PSL people fighting in the union. And Gloria herself, this is my main point. The PSL people who are in the unions, they just act as bureaucrats within the unions. And Gloria, Steve, you know who Steve Zeltser is, and I know you probably have opinions about that man, but
Don't want to talk about the fool in his absence.
but regardless of, and I'm sorry for, I don't want to bring up something that you guys aren't familiar with, but I just want to say, he's part of a union. Gloria LaRiva is part of that same union. That union tried to pass a resolution demanding the freedom of Julian Assange, right? Gloria LaRiva blocked it. Gloria LaRiva blocked it.
Oh.
And so,
What?
the problem with the PSL leadership is that they act like socialists, but only within their party. But the PSL leadership, they'll talk socialism in the PSL, but they won't talk socialism in the unions. They won't talk socialism.
I want you to give me that document
I will do that.
that showed that
I'll do
that
it.
revealed that she blocked it because I support Assange.
I do too.
And
I was very
can't
upset when I heard that.
I can't understand it.
He said Steve had it, right? Steve told you.
Yeah.
Part of that.
But he's part of that union. Look,
You can get it from Steve. Yeah.
yeah. And by the way, look, I don't want to get into a discussion about Steve in his absence, or anyone for that matter in their absence, but
Guys, there's an audience here. You gotta stop talking to each other.
That's right.
exactly. I don't want to get into a discussion about that, but the point is, the left is, look, the original point we were trying to make is that, I don't know, the left in this country, I think the left just needs to, I just think the left needs to, look, program's important, theory's important, but the left needs to stop talking to itself. And that's kind of what we did there, but that, like, what we did there is not what, don't take that, please, don't follow that example, please. And, like, and if anything, that was bad behavior on all of our part, because
All of our. Ain't that nothing?
because at the end of the day, it's like, this right here, the left is dead. Because even if we have the correct views or whatever, I feel like we're not. I feel like we're kind of isolated. The left keeps talking to itself, but they don't talk to anyone who's not already convinced. It's like the people who join communist groups. The people who are joining communist groups, or even mass orgs of these communist groups, no matter what group it is, including the group I'm a part of, okay? It's people who come looking for this stuff. We need to look for people who are not looking for this stuff already.
Right, that's true.
Well, no offense, but I saw you at the ILW, the International Longshore and Warehousemen's Union. You were doing the right thing. I am supporting the International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union. They're in a contract discussion right now. The bosses just walked out Monday. Somebody died on the waterfront Tuesday. So, no offense, but I'm going to be working with those longshoremen in their struggle to, get a decent contract. So.
No, I think you're totally right in doing that.
All right, so we have maybe 10 minutes left, and sort of we'll take maybe one last question from the gentleman there in the back, and maybe you guys can sort of fold in your sort of closing remarks / your closing statements, and we'll go in the order you guys open. So Dave, Gerald, and Alex. So gentleman in the back, take it away.
You guys were kind of already talking about this, but I was curious if you could give an example either from American history or in another country of what you would consider to be like a successful, genuine workers' party.
Wants to start?
Dave, same order we begun with.
No, I won't say PSLs. Okay, but certainly the Bolshevik. Everybody looks at the Bolshevik Party, where they were a pretty successful workers' party, and then it was really rooted. The Bolsheviks, of course, were really rooted in the workers, and it was true working class organization in Petrograd, St. Petersburg today. That the revolution really was made, and in Moscow, through the Soviets, to the workers' Soviets. So that's really true. And I think the Communist Party of China was a genuine one. And there were many successful and not so successful parties. But the history of the 20th century was pretty violent and tough on the working class parties. We had the rise of fascism and other things. So a lot of people perished, a lot of parties and organizations and people perished in the battles of the 20th century. But there are many solid working class parties, and I would even account the CP among that group, the CP-USA, in its heyday in the 20s, especially in 20s and 30s. So there is kind of we have had successes. We don't need to think we can't be successful. We can be successful. We built parties, workers have built parties in the past, and they've taken power. And because class struggle is an objective phenomenon, we know that from Marx, right? Whatever the workers may think about the class struggle at certain times, it's an objective phenomenon. The contradiction between labor and capital, that's an objective thing. Workers may have the wrong idea about it for a time, but over the course of time, reality tends to assert itself. And that objective contradiction is not going away, it's getting sharper now. So there is a material basis for us to organize a revolutionary movement, I think.
All right, thanks, Dave. Gerald?
Okay. The word success or successful is a relative word. And we have to understand then the concept of degeneration. Whenever any organization forms and declares its aim, its goal. If it does not successfully complete that goal in, let's say, 10 years, it tends to degenerate. It tends to go off of the path that it originally entered. So, for instance, after the First International was formed and Marx said, look, you know what? We have to go back home and build mass parties. And that's exactly what they did. They built mass parties for the working class in France, Germany, other places, right? And those parties organized the working class, created, for instance, in Germany, which was the leading party of the Second International, they formed all kinds of housing co-ops. They would take the kids out at summer. In summer, they call them the young pioneers. So they actually looked after the workers' kids. They formed unions. I know a lot of people don't know this, but in the newspapers that the workers formed, they serialized Karl Marx's Capital. So workers grew up reading Capital in the newspaper. This was, but what test did they fail? They failed the test when World War I started. They failed that test and they supported their own bourgeoisie, a nationalist position as opposed to an internationalist position. Degeneration seized them, took control of them. Okay, there was a fight. They formed a new international, the Third International, and new parties, the communist parties. And they got off to a pretty, good start. Most places in this world, in fact, Germany, the Communist Party, when the Social Democratic Party was 2 million members, the Communist Party had 1 million members. It was the biggest communist party in the world outside of the Soviet Union. Time, degeneration. If you don't meet your goal, you tend to degenerate. Keep that in mind, because that's with unions, so that's where I actually agree with him that sometimes you need to start something new. Because if you try to stay with you can't keep breathing air into a dying body, so to speak. Okay, so that is why I am for, and still for, the building of a workers' party that will fight for a workers' government. And unfortunately, that path, that goal, has not been reached in this country. Finish.
Thanks, Gerald. And last but not least, Alex.
Even though that goal hasn't been reached, of course, as impossible as it may seem, it's our fight. It is. The working class needs leadership. The working class needs a party. We don't have a party of our own. We must do anything necessary to achieve that. I think I think you asked the question originally. What was it against? What successful workers' parties in the world? I would say, look, Lenin said we should study the treasures of mankind. We should study all the revolutions that existed. We should study the different workers' parties that had prominence or have prominence. But honestly, in America, I don't think the revolution, especially in the 21st century, is going to even have too much similarity with one particular revolution. I think there will be similarities and there will be things we can learn from all of them. But I think if it were so easy, right, it would have already been figured out long ago. We would already have at least a workers' party if it were that easy. So I think part of it is that we kind of have to make things up as we go along. Of course, learn from the past, but again, not everything that was true yesterday was true today, and not everything that's true today will be true tomorrow. So I think I don't have the answer. I don't pretend to have the answer. Nobody really has the answer 100% of the time. And I think, like I said, we're just making things up as we go along.
All right. Thanks, Alex. And on that note, thank you all guys, you guys for all coming out, and thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.